and welcome to the course Social Behavior and the Brain, Introduction to Social Neuroscience. I am Dr. Ark Verma. I am an associate professor at the Department of Cognitive Science in IIT Kanpur. This is the 6th week where we are going to talk about different aspects of regulating social behavior, and in this particular lecture I am going to talk about the development of regulation in social behavior. So, when an individual basically lies on the continuum of reflective processing really depends on the confluence of factors. So, you remember in the previous lecture we were talking about a combination of automatic evaluations and reflective evaluations. We were talking about the various factors like motivational factors, initial impressions and so on. We were talking about how each of those factors combine together to give us a more nuanced, a more complex evaluation of the situation. Now, in that regard, just continuing that discussion in this lecture as well, where exactly an individual lies on the continuum of reflective processing. For example, if all the decisions are taken on just automatic impressions or all the decisions are taken in highly complicated, highly elaborated ways, it depends on a number of factors. For example, how much time is available? If very little time is available, then obviously a lot of deliberation, a lot of reflection is not possible. You cannot over analyze, you cannot analyze in detail, you cannot intake a lot of information, you cannot reach a nuanced understanding of the phenomena or the person or the concept, and hence in these situations the stereotypes might galore, they might become the primary sources for how do you decide to act or how do you let your prejudice manifest, regulated, dysregulated in that sense. Also the opportunity, sometimes there is very little opportunity to be able to do that. You have never interacted with these people, you have never really had any interaction. So, whatever your overall impressions and stereotypes tell you, you think that okay, that is the easiest and the most economic way to behave. Also motivation, are you really looking to do that? For example, remember we have been seeing so far in several chapters before or several lectures before that sometimes people, or a lot of times actually, people are there with egalitarian motives. Nobody wants to be specifically unnecessarily biased against somebody else. But even if people have these egalitarian motives, a lot of times they let the prior associations get the better of them. So, time is important, opportunity is important, but the motivation to do do these things nicely is also important, and together these things decide how inclined you are to engage in reflective processing or how much you let the automatic impressions take the better of you. Alright. So, another important factor that may influence reflective processing is the functionality of the prefrontal cortex. Remember, the brain sort of matures, it has a particular timeline of maturation. Also there are obviously individual differences in the overall activity, overall engagement of the prefrontal cortex in different individuals. So, in this case a very important factor is the functionality of the prefrontal cortex, which is defined in terms of either brain damage or in terms of overall neural development that continues from childhood until adolescence. Alright. It must be therefore noted, and we have been talking about this the prefrontal cortex is engaged in conscious, elaborative, deliberative processing, and if the prefrontal cortex is not functioning optimally, then maybe we will not be able to have the benefit of this kind of elaborative processing. Okay. So, and self regulation also comes from various aspects of the prefrontal cortex, the ACC, the DLPFC and so on. So, self regulation therefore in these specific circumstances depends critically on the prefrontal cortex, and the development in these regions or the development of these regions is thought to underlie the emergence of various cognitive processes, moral reasoning, causal reasoning, detailed analysis of things, having a nuanced or a mature approach towards things. All of this actually depends upon how well the prefrontal cortex is functioning. Remember all sorts of social inhibition, all sorts of regulation of behavior. You remember the case of Phineas Gage, we have talked about this, I do not know whether in this course, but also in the course on brain and behavior we have talked about that in more detail, that Phineas Gage was a railroad worker, and during an accident an iron rod enters his left cheek and comes out through the frontal part of the skull, takes away the prefrontal cortex, and after that the regulation of behavior becomes extremely poor in this person. He goes around hurling profanities and fighting with everybody, abusing everybody, becoming really unpleasant individual to be around with. So, the prefrontal cortex optimal functioning therefore is cannot be overstated, its importance cannot be overemphasized. For instance, with the cognitive and neural development, children, and you can see this in children also. So, as they are developing cognitively and neurally, the brain is maturing, children become more and more sophisticated in their ability to consciously reflect on thoughts, actions, people and situations. So, initially you will see that they will not have a broader view, they will be deficient at perspective taking, they will have, for example, just a black and white, good and bad kind of view. But gradually as they are growing up, you can reason with them, you can tell them more causes and outcomes, and you can expect them to be able to develop a slightly more nuanced approach and worldview about a bunch of things. Now, even though very young children are still capable of quickly evaluating whether a stimulus is broadly good or bad, their capacity for conscious reflection allows children to make increasingly complex evaluations as they are growing older. It does not come immediately, it is not happening from 3 years old. They have a sense of good and bad, yes, but they do not have a a more nuanced sense of this. Remember, we were talking about in the last lecture of the blacks and whites and the grays. So, to understand that there is gray, it takes a lot of time for the child to develop and reach that stage. Development of the prefrontal cortex, yes, it underlies the child's transformation from stimulus bound infants to goal oriented individuals capable of regulation and reflection. So, initially what will happen is you take a edible thing, maybe an ice cream or a toffee or a lollipop to a child, and the child will not be able to regulate and will say, oh, I want this, even though they just have had their food. Okay. So, their initial interactions are basically stimulus bound, you show them something, they get excited and they want that, all right. Later they start inculcating things like, oh, I have had my food, I do not think I should have something at this point, or maybe it is not good for me, my mother has told me that I should not be eating this. Goal oriented individuals, motivated individuals, that happens a bit later, and again remember that is contingent to how the stage of development the prefrontal cortex is in. Just take an example. For example, one very initial very important marker of prefrontal cortex maturation is this shift in the ratio of gray to white matter. Gray matter volume reaches adult levels earlier in the orbitofrontal cortex than in the more lateral areas of the prefrontal cortex, okay, and which achieve maturity only towards the end of their adolescence. So, for example, 16, 17 years of age, and only at around this age you will see more nuanced reasoning, more mature reasoning that you will sort of associate with older children as opposed to younger children. So, the protracted developmental course of lateral the developmental course of the lateral areas of the prefrontal cortex have therefore been documented using different kinds of measures. One of them is the measure of cortical thickness. Now, importantly, the regions of the brain that are involved in relatively automatic effective responses to stimuli, they develop somewhat earlier than regions associated with more controlled processing. So, this is also very interesting. Regions that are involved in automatic responses, automatic evaluations, non-deliberative processing, they mature much earlier. So, you will see that we describe children sometimes as being very impulsive. Why are they impulsive? Because the capacity to reason or the capacity to reflect in more complicated manner happens or develops anyways much later. You cannot obviously say that everything is contingent to brain maturation, because there are also very old people who behave rather foolishly or impulsively, but then that is another discussion. With children, the regions again reiterating this point, the regions of the brain that are involved in the relatively automatic affective responses to stimuli, they develop and they mature much earlier. So, they are active and influencing children's behavior at a very early age. When or with the development of the prefrontal cortex, children become able to override the relatively automatic affective responses mediated by the amygdala and the OFC. For example, again a 3-year-old, 4-year-old child cannot do that, but a slightly older child, 8 years old or 10 years old, if you tell them that this is in this weather eating an ice cream is not good for you, that child a bit older, although may find it very difficult, will still be able to suppress that urge to have an ice cream just because an ice cream is there or somebody in their friend circle is eating an ice cream. Younger children, because these areas the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed, they will find it extremely hard and may not be able to do that. As soon as the ice cream is there, they will just want to have it and eat it. So, rather than simply responding to the salient aspects of a stimulus, conscious reflection allows children to integrate both positive and negative information and generate a slightly more considered evaluation of a stimulus. Remember, this will happen much later in age, 13, 14, 15, 16 years, when the prefrontal cortex is closer to its maturational state. Are there any evidence about these things what I am saying? So, evidence for the development of more controlled processing in the face of stimuli that elicit automatic appetitive responses comes from studies assessing the ability of young children to delay gratification. I was saying giving this example about ice cream. So, Principi and Zelazzo they actually reported that when children were given an option between a small reward now and a larger reward later, there were increases in the tendency to delay the gratification amongst children between the age of 3 to 5 years. Okay. So, it is happening at this particular age. This development of the ability to control affective reactions to stimuli has also been studied using a modified version of the Iowa gambling task. What is this task about? A version of this task was used that which had only 2 decks of cards. One was advantageous. So, if you would keep pulling out cards from here, eventually you will have net gains, and another task, another deck of cards where you when keep pulling cards out of that, you have net losses. And they presented the information about rewards and losses in form of happy or sad faces. So, happy faces will say there is more reward here, sad faces will say there is more loss here. Now, over the course of the task, 4 and 5-year-olds developed a preference for the advantageous decks. They could realize, they could reason that, but the 3-year-olds could not do it. Okay. So, it tells you that there is a progression of maturation from 3 years, 4 years and 5 years. Now, if you consider this data, it seems that the ability to make advantageous decisions based on a sophisticated evaluation improves during preschool years and continues to develop over the course of childhood. Okay. So, remember in the previous task we said there was some evidence of delayed gratification in 3 to 5-year-old children, but not earlier than that. And if you compare, let us say 3 to 5, 6 to 8, 9 to 12, 13 to 15, if you compare, you will see a progression of the development of the prefrontal cortex, and you will see that gradually the reasoning will become more mature, the delayed gratification will be easier to do, and all of these things which are contingent upon the development of the prefrontal cortex. So, if you look at this evidence together, it suggests that with the development, children are indeed able to make increasingly reflective evaluations, and they are able to integrate information about the current situation with more accurate predictions of long term consequences. They start understanding causality more. They start understanding that okay, in this particular scenario, if I listen to my mother, I will have a reward later. They will start understanding, for example, that oh, this is at this time where my basic urge is to just go out and play and so on, but because I have my exams the next day, if I just wait till I have completed studying the important syllabus, I will get the chance to play as well, and I will score good marks in the exam as well. So, that comes with time, with the development of the neural structures. And these are rather sophisticated decisions that the children have to make, and they gradually learn to make it. So, these kinds of more sophisticated evaluations probably result in part from the more complex reflective processes which are instantiated in the higher order prefrontal cortical regions. Okay. remember the iterative preprocessing model. So, with each iteration of this evaluative system, more and more complex processes have the ability to shape their evaluative responses to match goals and situational constraints. So, what are your goals? Remember, we talked about in the last class that the motivational goals of an individual are also very pertinent in the kind of evaluations they are making. The constraints that are placed on them are also important in the view of the evaluation that they are making. So, as new information becomes available, it can be used to create a more complex representation of a stimulus to the extent that it is incorporated into one's evaluation. So, as and when more and more information becomes available, and as and when the individuals become capable of including this, analyzing this and including this in their evaluative structure, they basically get this ability to do that. They basically get this ability to make their evaluations more nuanced, more complex, in line with how elaborative or reflective processing would dictate. So, with neural maturation, with the maturation of the brain, which includes increases in processing speed as well, children should be able to iterate, run these cycles more quickly, add more information in every cycle, add more analysis in every cycle. They will be able to do that rapidly and more efficiently, which will allow for them to make more complex evaluations as they grow up. It does not happen at 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, 5 year of age. It happens, keeps getting better with age, is what we should say. So, the developmental course of evaluative processing, including its neural and cognitive underpinnings, it therefore seems a very important area of future research. Now, let us move on to a different side a little bit. We have seen so far that evaluation basically and attitudes possess a relatively, children possess a relatively sophisticated evaluative system, which is capable of split second preconscious judgments as well as drawn out complex deliberative decisions. As we grow up, we keep having this. We have a split second sort of evaluation, but we have preconscious judgments, but we also have drawn out complex, very well analyzed deliberative decisions. So, it seems that neuroimaging research is beginning to unpack the neural correlates of the different components of evaluation and enhancing our own understanding of the evaluative system. So, it is gradually the neural research, the fMRI studies and the PET studies, the ERP studies are actually gradually trying to understand what are the different components and how do these different components mature over time, and what role do these different components play going further in allowing us this dual ability to have a split second rapid evaluations as well as more drawn out deliberative evaluations. So far, we have seen, for example, that the current model that we have been discussing, working model of attitudes, wherein current evaluations of stimuli are continually updated and integrated with additional attitudinal, situational and motivational information, seems to work fine. So, we have a sense by the last 2-3 lectures, we have a sense of this fact that yes, there will be some initial evaluation, and then these initial evaluations can be made richer and more complex and more nuanced by this iterative addition of newer information. Okay. The data that we have reviewed so far, it suggests that this evaluative cycle supported by affective regions, which are for example, the amygdala and the insula, is actually sustained, and it is modulated by activity in the prefrontal areas, allowing for more reflective, context and goal appropriate evaluations. So, this is what we have seen, the bunch of studies that we saw, they basically support this whole idea. But there are also very interesting implications of this, there are also very interesting takeaways from this. For example, a very important implication of the reviewed model is that a person's evaluative state is dynamic, it is not fixed and it is not rigid in any which way. It changes from time to time, as and when more and more information is coming in, the nature of the evaluation is changing, the evaluative state is changing. So, social psychology literature in this case has recently grappled with the apparent dissociations between implicit and explicit measures. Remember, we have been talking about dual modes, automatic and elaborative. There is also implicit and explicit, which is a similar kind of a dichotomy. For example, people may report pro-black or egalitarian attitudes on self-report measures, but they can actually be shown to have a pro-white, anti-black, attitude when a response latency is measured. So, in an experimental task versus in a self-report task, you can see that explicitly when they are asked, they will say something else. Implicitly when you are measuring, the response will be something else. Remember, we have seen that implicit measures mein amygdala activity keeps showing up when the white participants are watching black faces, irrespective of the fact that they profess or not profess egalitarian, equalitarian attitudes. So, in this regard, some questions can be asked. For example, do people really have different attitude representations that are activated through different processing routes, and is one real attitude and the other is just a pretension, it is just a professed attitude or an artifact. The proposed model that we have been talking about so far suggests that these differences may actually reflect evaluations that are at different points in time, different stages of evaluative processing. Initially, they have a particular kind of attitude, positive, negative, based on automatic processing, but later after 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 iterations have happened, the evaluation has itself changed. So, it is not that the person is pretending something on this side, but performing differently on the other side. It is basically that when new information comes in, they sort of are able to integrate that new information and they are able to update their current evaluative understanding. So, given this understanding, there seems therefore to be no real value in inquiring about or worrying about, oh, what is your real attitude or what is your true attitude. There is no real or true attitude as such, it is just a matter of time, it is just basically how much information was available at that point when the evaluation was made, and after 5 years, 10 years, so many years, when more information was added, maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes and so on, more information was added, the attitudes and evaluations are bound to change, and it is not hypocrisy. For example, a lot of us say, oh, this is hypocritical, it is not hypocritical. When you learn more information, you are bound to and allowed to update your evaluation about things. Now, to the extent that these evaluations actually shift over time, for example, as attitudinal, motivational and contextual information is reprocessed and reintegrated, the same individual can be said to possess multiple real evaluations of the same stimulus. Again, one is not real, one is not pretended. It is just that at each of these stages, the new evaluations are all real. They are in sync with that point in time, the knowledge that you have till that point, it is all real, all right. Also, if one accepts the idea that individuals may not have one true evaluation, a very interesting issue for future research could be to basically understand how evaluations arising at different points, how do these different kinds of evaluation arise during different points at this iterative continuum, and how do they relate to different sorts of behavior. So, is it that, for example, one day I am very harsh towards these other people, by next day I have so much more information that my attitude completely flips 180 degree. Does that really happen? So, in this regard, people basically have investigated, they have tried to study this. The studies that we have, so far we have discussed inform us that brain imaging does not really have a very clear idea about the content of a person's evaluation. We know that the evaluation is iterative, but we do not know at what point evaluation was what is the content, what is the evaluation like, it is positive, negative is all right, but what are the things that the individual are considering. At least the brain imaging data does not tell us that, maybe other kinds of experimental paradigms may be able to tell us that. So, rather patterns of neural activity are only interpretable when they are used in concert with more traditional behavioral measures, and when context and motivational states are also included in and or taken into account. Okay. An example, heightened activity in the amygdala and insula is observed in response to both positive and negative stimuli depending upon motivational states as well as evaluative focus. You are evaluating to promote, you are evaluating to prevent, you are wanting to positively interact, you are wanting to negatively put down somebody. All of these things modulate the kind of activity that will be observed in the amygdala and the insula. Similarly, prefrontal activity has been observed in response to social targets towards whom the participants were either motivated to suppress their initial negative reactions, or towards targets that the participants were comfortable in expressing negative reactions. See, some people who become more powerful in the society, you do not want to say bad things about them. Some people, for that matter, you are who cannot really harm you, they cannot really do anything about you, you are comfortable in expressing negative reactions with them. So, prefrontal activity also changes with respect to how you are interacting with these guys. So, our knowledge about neural activity at this point, it does not really allow us a lot of details into how someone actually evaluates a particular stimulus. It can tell us a little bit, it can tell us the mechanisms. I mean, the model that we have been talking about, the iterative reprocessing model, Cunningham and Celezo 2004, it tells us how the mechanism works. It does not tell us in much more detail about how does the content really change. So, sort of closing this, the discuss model also highlights a philosophical point, a very interesting point at that, about the nature of automatic versus reflective evaluations. For example, according to this, one can view the automatic evaluations that are as arising from phylogenetically older limbic areas, basic the older brain, the basic brain where the primal sort of animal like less moral things are coming from. And from that perspective, the increased prefrontal activity basically acts as a civilizer. Remember Sigmund Freud, in whatever discussion we are having in social or cognitive psychology, somehow Freud keeps popping up, and there is very interesting idea here that the initial evaluations, the initial impressions, positive, negative and so on, the initial want of someone or the initial disgust towards someone are all primal urges, are all animal like primal urges, and they are coming from the older limbic areas. Okay. As and when the prefrontal cortex, even evolutionarily, it would have developed and it would have started sort of functioning in particular ways, it seems to have added a more civilizing influence. It seems to have added this sense of tempering, and that this should be done, this should not be done. See, as the society evolved, as individuals evolved, as they started living together, as this notion of as this notion of civil code, civil laws, coexistence, peace, lawfulness came, they exert a civilizing influence. And this is also happening in the species level brain, if you want to look at that, or in individual's brain, as we just saw, as the child is developing, the more as the prefrontal cortex is coming into its own, it adds this civilizing, tempering influence on people's decision making. Similarly, at a societal or a species level, the prefrontal cortex, as and when its activity increased, and its capacity increased, it exerted a civilizing cognitive influence on more primitive emotional responses, holding in check aggressive and other primal urges, so that they do not at all times disrupt or put you in a hard position with respect to social behavior. Also, the iterative reprocessing model suggests that making a firm distinction between emotional and cognitive evaluations may not be the right thing, it may not be even possible for that matter. Rather, what we should be focused on is these are processes, look at these processes as driven by subcortical or prefrontal regions, A, and B, that these are rather interactive with each other. So, they are not isolated regions that are pulling you in different directions. So, from that regard, although prefrontal activity may be able to modulate early automatic responses, subcortical regions are very, very important, and they remain involved in the reprocessing and the reconstruction of evaluative states. These are not separate things. The brain does not work as much in modules as, say, for example, Fodor had would have thought. It works in concert. The different areas of the brain, even for the same cognitive function, the areas of the network are working in concert with each other. Also, as has been observed, the manner in which automatic evaluations are modulated depends upon a bunch of things. For example, the goal of the receiver as well as the social context. You may be completely angry on somebody, but you may express that anger in your closed group, but not in public. Okay, so people do all of these sorts of things. At times, the same may result in dampening of situationally inappropriate responses or negativity. At other times, it is however possible that the negative responses may be left unchecked. If you are in a see people, you might I will take this example of social media. When social media affords you anonymity, people behave like animals. They go on and troll somebody. They say all sorts of things. They become completely unchecked, sometimes under the garb of anonymity. So they don't, because nobody will know you. No, my identity is not attached. I can do or say anything that I like. But if you ask these same people to come and hurl the same kind of abuses in public in front of the same persons they are abusing, then the behavior actually changes. Okay. So in some situations, this negativity will obviously be suppressed and managed. In other situations, when you are with a close group, when you are feeling powerful, when you are feeling influential, maybe you will leave these unchecked and sort of let them have a full go. So in all, it has been suggested that reflective processing may actually be used in some circumstances to even justify negative evaluations by embedding them in complex cognitive structures. Basically saying, sometimes you have justifications of negative outcomes, sometimes you use those as rationales to behave badly, sometimes you will not have them. Okay. So relatively automatic processes therefore should not be viewed as necessarily resulting in less moral, appropriate or inappropriate or adaptive responses than relatively controlled processes. It is not by default that all automatic outcome of all automatic processes is negative. That is not really the case. It may depend on different attitude objects for that matter. To sum this up, the complexity of the evaluative system, if you look at this as we have been discussing in the last few lectures, it is likely that the proposed model will require some more revisions or more detailed specifications. Okay. With more recent neuroimaging research that is coming in conjunction with more social psychological methods, the kind of experiments people are doing, to give rise to a even better understanding of how attitudes and evaluations function, how do they arise, how are they moderated, and so on. So I will stop here. I will start with the next lecture in a bit with a slightly different topic in mind. Thank you.